This is CBN NewsWatch.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Monday, January 18th. I'm George Thomas. Today, President-elect Joe Biden getting ready to move quickly with his aggressive agenda. As soon as he takes office, we'll take a look at what he plans to do. Why some people are calling the debate over free speech online versus big tech censorship like something out of the classic novel 1984. And if you think America's politics are complicated, oh my, wait till we show you what's happening in Israel and how Martin Luther King Jr. worked with Billy Graham on racial integration. Those stories and much more today on NewsWatch. But we begin with Joe Biden planning to roll out an aggressive list of executive orders on his first day in office this week, from climate change to immigration reform, as he's looking to undo President Trump's policies. Here's CBN's Dale Hurd.
Joe Biden is planning a 10-day blitz of executive action on what he calls the four crises facing the country: COVID-19, the economic downturn, racial injustice, and climate change. Biden's incoming chief of staff laid out the agenda in a memo released to the media over the weekend.
He's going to come back to the White House after giving that speech at the Capitol and take some immediate actions to start to move this country forward. We're inheriting a huge mess here, Jake, but we have a plan to fix it.
Among the several planned executive orders Biden is planning to roll out, a 100-day mask mandate to fight COVID-19, making a path for illegal immigrants, return the U.S. to the Paris Climate Accords, restart the Iran nuclear deal, and overturn President Trump's travel ban against some Muslim-majority countries. Biden also wants to raise the corporate income tax rate to 28%. Senator Lindsey Graham says returning to the Paris Climate Accords will be a disaster for the U.S. economy.
That's what he's going to lead off with. He's going to have a tough rollout of his presidency.
With 2 days to go until Biden's planned inauguration, a massive security operation is taking shape. Up to 25,000 National Guard members will be in D.C. this week, some setting up cots inside the Capitol. The question some are asking: why so many soldiers when the National Mall will be closed to the public during the inauguration? Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser says the threat is from white domestic terrorists.
How serious is our country going to take domestic white extremism? And I think what we saw here last week is that we didn't take it seriously enough.
But officials have begun vetting all of the National Guard troops, fearful that the very people assigned to provide protection for the inauguration could be a threat. Across the country, state houses are also preparing for protest, but planned demonstrations over the weekend turned out to be far fewer than expected. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris says she'll resign her Senate seat today, and California Governor Gavin Newsom will appoint California's Secretary of State Alex Padilla to serve the final 2 years of Harris's term. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thank you, Dale. The website of the free speech platform Parler is partially back online. The site was taken down by Amazon Web Services, but now Parler has found another web hosting service. For now, the website simply has a message from CEO John Mites saying Parler plans to welcome its users back soon. Both Apple and Google removed the app as well as, and they haven't restored it yet, but Mites believes Parler will soon return, allowing users to give their opinions on the issues of the day. The moves by Apple, Google, and Amazon ignited a huge debate over free speech versus censorship by big tech companies. And here with more on that is Dan Andros of faithwire.com. Great to have you back on the broadcast. So, Dan, tell us about this debate over free speech online. Many conservatives argue they are being censored. Why do they say that?
Well, this has been bubbling up here for a couple of years now, George. You have conservatives complaining because you would see often from the big tech media giants a suspension or a ban, and later it would be retracted as unintentional or a mistake in most cases. But rarely would you ever see one of those instances, if ever, against someone who would consider themselves on the left side of the political spectrum. So it seemed to be very one-sided, and none of these big tech companies really provide a look under the hood. Nobody could really see what these algorithms are doing and who's deciding and making these decisions. You just have these vague community service and terms of service rules to be using the platforms, and they would use those as a standard for justifying these bans. And of course, when we saw it ramp up with President Trump recently, it's just leaving more questions and concerns than anything else.
Yeah. Dan, even international politicians from France and other countries criticized big tech's actions. What are they saying?
Yeah, well, after President Trump's permanent ban from Twitter and suspension from Facebook and all the other resulting punishments that came to Trump on social media, you had leaders from Mexico, even Russia, and Germany all chimed in, France as well, as you said. They spoke out saying it was shocking, and they called it the digital oligarchy that was controlling speech. Angela Merkel said it was problematic. Mexico's president said, how can you censor someone? And also Alexei Navalny from Russia also said it was an unacceptable act of censorship. And interesting to note, though, that those are all calling for government to be in control of this, kind of different from America's usual standard, where we value just pure free speech.
Yeah. Some people argue that all of this is like something straight out of George Orwell's 1984. Why are they saying that?
Well, first and foremost, it's because 1984 recently just topped Amazon's bestseller list in the bookstore there. So people are obviously concerned about this. They're going back and reading this and taking a look at it, because clearly the phrase Orwellian, talking about big government, the Ministry of Truth, having the government sort of deem and sort of brainwash people on information. So you had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently say that they are absolutely looking into sort of a department to monitor the information that comes out on media, and then deem what is true or false, kind of in line with what these foreign leaders are saying. So it has a lot of people concerned that we may be seeing. A lot of people have said 1984. This book has come, and a lot of people are even more concerned about that.
Yeah. Dan, as always, thank you so much. Dan Andros of faithwire.com. And by the way, and for more important stories and trends in the news, tune in to Faithwire tonight at 8:30 Eastern on the CBN News Channel. The case of a photographer who could face massive fines because of his Christian beliefs about same-sex marriage is in the hand of the courts. Bob Updegrove is fighting the Virginia Values Act, which he insists favors gay rights over religious convictions. Paul Strand has that story.
After a hearing in a Virginia court, photographer Bob Updegrove talked about how he feels state lawmakers slander his beliefs.
Call views like mine bigotry and want to punish me, to remove me from the public square.
His lawyers maintain their client isn't anti-gay. He's simply following his faith while trying to make a living.
He believes that marriage is between one man and one woman. And Bob serves everyone, he just can't convey all messages.
I serve customers no matter who they are. But the government oversteps when it attempts to force me to promote views I disagree with.
And if Updegrove refuses to shoot all kinds of weddings, Virginia could hit him with harsh penalties.
$50,000 for a first-time violation and $100,000 for a second-time violation. Enough to put any small business owner out of business.
When the government can tell you what to do, what to say, and what to create, then we do not live in a free America.
Remember, this affects everybody. A Democratic speechwriter should not have to create a stump speech for a Republican candidate, and a Muslim artist should not be forced to create a T-shirt saying Jesus, Son of God, for a Christian church.
Updegrove's lawyers believe this court will likely side with their client because of what the U.S. Supreme Court has already decided on this issue. It ruled because of wedding cake creator Jack Phillips' religious beliefs, he couldn't be forced to bake cakes for same-sex weddings. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, if you thought America's politics are complicated, things are even more complex in Israel. We'll take a look at the state of the Israeli political race as the Jewish state faces its fourth election in 2 years. That story when we come back. Stay tuned.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug-of-war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline, Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Welcome back to the broadcast. In just over 2 months, Israelis will head to the polls for the 4th time in 2 years. As Chris Mitchell explains from Jerusalem, this time some important changes on the political landscape that could have a major impact on the results.
The latest election cycle began in late December when Israel's parliament couldn't pass a budget. Failure to meet the deadline automatically triggered the new election, now scheduled for March 23rd. It also ends the 7-month-long contentious coalition led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and retired Chief of Staff Benny Gantz.
The way it looks like the national camp, the right-wing party will get more support. You know, parties like the Labour Party, Blue and White, I'm not sure we will see them in few months. But within the right-wing parties, you have a split between those who support the Prime Minister and those who are not willing to cooperate with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Middle East analyst Joel Rosenberg says the new election landscape poses a major challenge to Netanyahu and the Likud party because of challenges from the right.
Here's the key. More and more leaders of the smaller parties are saying they will never serve in a Netanyahu government. That is getting close to a critical mass. But if they can't build a coalition, because the leaders of almost every other party says they won't serve with Netanyahu, and he's got a huge problem on his hands.
Gideon Sa'ar is now Netanyahu's main challenger. Once a Likud party leader and the prime minister's cabinet secretary, he's moved to form his own party called New Hope.
So now there is a real full-right Likud-type alternative. And that's a chink in the armor of Netanyahu, both because he left the party and because he's a legitimate leader and because he said, and people believe him, he will not sit with Netanyahu.
Netanyahu is putting his campaign's hope on successfully leading Israel out of the COVID pandemic. Israel currently leads the world in vaccinations per capita, and Netanyahu seeks to reopen Israel in time for the March election and Passover. The coronavirus has hit Israel hard.
This is a very big issue, and Israel has never dealt with an economic crisis of this magnitude. So Israelis are very concerned. It affects everything, but they also feel that their leadership, their elected leadership, kind of abandoned them for personal reasons.
Other factors Israeli voters will likely consider include the Iranian threat, Netanyahu's upcoming corruption trial, and the potential impact of a Biden administration on issues like the Abraham Accords. Despite Netanyahu's challenges, Likud remains Israel's strongest political party. If Netanyahu can show significant progress against the coronavirus pandemic, expand the Abraham Accords, and keep Iran at bay, he could again confound experts who have his political obituary already written. The fractured political landscape, however, makes predicting this election's outcome extremely difficult. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Chris. Still ahead, life in prison was a living hell, and even though he was only 28 and had never committed a violent crime, he realized he was never getting out. But then something changed to give him and many others new hope. We'll show you what happened right after this.
To have a sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
Watch Dan and Dale tackle trending topics that test your faith on the next Faith Wire, Monday night at 9:30. The Global Lane takes you around the world, providing facts over fiction.
What might rising trade and geopolitical tensions mean for you on the home front?
With over 45 years of experience, award-winning journalist Gary Lane brings you the truth from a global angle.
What about the issue of immigration?
World news analysis you won't see anywhere else.
And it's all right here on the Global Lane.
Watch The Global Lane, Thursday night at 9:30.
It's like a great attraction. It starts a chain reaction with almost satisfaction. I love the way this joy makes me move. Yeah, I got that. I dance around because I know it. I move around because I got it. Joy's in the heart. I dance around because I know it. I move around because I got it. Joy's in the heart. Joy's in the
Like being buried alive. That's how one federal inmate described his life sentence. He wasn't a murderer or a child molester. He was 28 years old and had never even committed a violent crime. So how did he get locked up for life? And what changed that gave him and so many others new hope? Caitlin Burke explains.
Really like hell, like how they describe hell. Nobody can hear you screaming, hear your screams. That's really how it is. I mean, you hear people screaming all night. That's all I used to think about. We're in hell.
At the age of 28, a judge sentenced Herman Tate to life in prison without parole for a low-level, nonviolent drug offense.
Buried alive. Just imagine it. Putting you in a casket and you're alive. But you can stand up and walk around in it. That's what it is. You can't get out.
Tate's sentence fell under the federal three-strikes drug law passed by Congress in the 1980s. It states that if someone is charged with a federal drug crime and already has 2 prior drug offenses, then that's the third strike, and a federal prosecutor can require the judge to impose a mandatory life sentence. Tate's first strike came in 1992 for selling half a gram of crack. His sentence, 6 months probation. He gained his second strike 2 years later. That time, he sold 7.7 grams of cocaine. Sentenced to 5 years in prison, Tate was only required to serve 8 months. Then, in 1998, he struck out, charged with conspiracy to sell cocaine. Tate, however, had never heard of the three-strikes drug law, and since no drugs were found in his possession, he chose to go to trial. The prosecutor filed what's known as an 851 notice.
That means that even if the judge wanted to take pity on you, even if the judge believed that you could be rehabilitated, even if the judge believed that the sentence was too harsh, that sheet of paper meant that you had to receive a mandatory life sentence without parole.
Life.
Wow.
For nothing.
Tate headed to federal prison,
where it took 2 years for the gravity of his sentence to sink in.
I keep seeing people going home, and I'm like, man, and I realize, hey, I'm never going home. And it just hit me all of a sudden. And that's when I realized that I had a life sentence in the federal system.
The 3 Strikes federal drug law covers all 50 states. Many states have gone further, expanding 3 Strikes laws that impose mandatory life sentences for 3 convictions of certain felonies. In California, for example, the 1994 3 Strikes You're Out law was designed to keep murderers, rapists, and child molesters behind bars. Today, however, more than half sentenced under that law are serving life sentences for nonviolent crimes. Evidence that these 3 Strikes laws can result in unintended consequences. My Angel Cody is an attorney and the director of the Decarceration Collective, a team of women fighting to free people sentenced to life in prison for drugs and end the policies that put them there. Many of her clients were teenagers or young adults when convicted with their 3rd strike. The mandatory life sentence that followed, basically erasing the possibility of maturation and growth, stamping them instead as irredeemable.
The most potent example of sort of the human spirit, right, is that we tell someone you're buried alive and you're never going to leave prison. And for the person to still have the audacity and the wherewithal to get up every day and to try to make some meaning of your life, I think is, for me, it's deeply inspiring. It's why I do the work. It also is the most salient example of why we ought to go back and look at these different laws.
When Congress passed the Fair Sentencing Act in 2010, it provided the potential for a lower sentence, but did nothing for those already in prison. Then, in 2018, President Trump signed the First Step Act, which finally allowed the opportunity to reconsider prior sentences. In reading the new law, Tate regained a sense of hope for the first time in nearly 22 years.
And I'm like, oh, Lord, because it fit me. I fit the criteria.
Cody and her team officially requested his life sentence be reduced. In January of 2020, Tate learned of his freedom.
I'm just watching the TV, and my case manager come out and called my name, Tate. Took my earbuds out. I'm like, yeah, what's up? She's like, you need to come to my office right now. I'm like, oh. So I go over there, and she turns around with a big smile on her face. I'm like, what's wrong with you? She said, Tate, you going home. I just started crying. I said, don't play. She said, I'm for real. I said, don't lie to me. And that's when I found out.
Still, an estimated 800 inmates could likely die in prison under the 3 Strikes drug law. A disproportionate number of them are Black.
There are all these places along the highway towards imprisonment where people get off, right? And then there are on-ramps. And what we've seen is that disproportionately, it's more difficult for African Americans to exit off of that highway, right? And that more of them are on that highway towards mass incarceration and imprisonment. Some of that relates to charging decisions that are made. Some of that relates to the rates of arrest. Some of it relates to community resources that are available.
No legislation reforming the federal 3 Strikes drug law includes those sentenced to life for marijuana convictions. But Cody believes change is coming.
I absolutely believe that transformative justice will occur. And the reason why is because I think that people are awake and paying attention.
Cody says now is the time for the American people to ask questions and put pressure on our elected officials. That's because voters can make a major impact at the ballot box and be the catalyst that keeps Cody's clients and many others from being buried alive behind bars. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Coming up on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we'll show you how he helped another famous American, Billy Graham, as he integrated his crusades.
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
It's about the competition.
I kind of put that pressure on myself, and I think people had expectations.
It's about overcoming.
We use this phrase all the time, keep chopping, keep practicing hard.
It's about going the distance.
I think as a father, it's my job, to lead, just be the best husband and father I can be.
Watch Going the Distance with Sean Brown Saturday night at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Welcome back. Today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and not only was he a civil rights leader, he also played a role in another major movement in America, Billy Graham's evangelistic crusades. Back in 1953, despite segregation and racial tensions, Graham held an integrated crusade in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and his crusades in New York became increasingly integrated. Graham even invited his good friend, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to one of his events.
We thank thee this evening for the marvelous things which have been done in this city through the dynamic preaching of this great evangelist. We ask thee, O God, to continue blessing him.
King suggested to Graham that he should stay in the South and hold integrated meetings there, which he did, leading crusades from Arkansas to Alabama. Well, folks, that is it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've been seeing by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Or you can talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. From all of us here from the headquarters of the Christian Broadcasting Network in Virginia Beach, Virginia, we wish you a fantastic Monday and a great rest of the week ahead. Goodbye and God bless.